Hello, hello, and welcome back to the second Twitter poll. Um, in the prior episode where I was talking about Necrons, I think it was, I said that I offered up a poll of whether for me to draw Necrons or Shantae, and Shantae won, and I said, but not by enough. So as a result, I ended up drawing Necrons anyways. There's a little bit more truth to that story, and the truth is that from the very beginning, I knew that Shantae was going to be the one that was going to win, and I had already started drawing the. I think I may have even mentioned this. I had already started actually drawing the Necron image by the time I actually started the poll. And the purpose of the poll actually was, one, just to see how many people actually cared one way or the other. Because I was going to draw that Necron either way, but it could have just been a standalone picture, or it could have been an art gripe. And it was close enough that I was like, I'll go ahead and record this. So I got rid of the little bit that I already had and then started back over. So that's the story of that. I started a second poll, and the second poll was Shantae versus, what's her name? Korone. The YouTube doggo VTuber girl from Japan. And that was mainly a joke, of course. I was going to draw Shantae either way. I wouldn't betray you twice. But the purpose of that was, again, just to see, do people even know who the hell that is? And the answer was, surprisingly, yes, some people actually knew who that was. And in fact, I think the final results were somewhere in around the range of 25% or so. People actually responded in favor of Korone. So I'll end up doing that too. It probably won't be an art gripe or anything. It might be. It might be. Leave in the comments whether you want there to be an art gripe about a Japanese VTuber. I have no idea. I have no clue what I would talk about. I might bring Paige on for that just to occupy some time then. I can't talk about VTubers for 40 minutes. No thank you. But in this particular instance, I'll be talking about Shantae, of course. I do not have much of a history with the Shantae franchise or anything. Not that educated about it, can't speak with any degree of authority or anything of that nature. I think I may have actually even already had an art gripe about Shantae in the past. I cannot remember. Maybe not. But I do remember talking about it. I may have done like a one-off where I was just talking about the game as I was playing it. Because I do remember talking about the art style in the prior game, which I think was Shantae and Risky something. One of the characters is named Risky. Shantae and the Risky Day. That's what it was. Shantae and the Risky Day. That's exactly what the name was. No. There's a couple of reasons why I wanted to bring up Shantae. Is because, one, the latest game came out, which is Shantae and the Seven Sirens. And I have since completed that. I finished that yesterday in preparation for this particular video. And also, there was also a little bit of news coming out that Way Forward, and I don't know if they're in partnership with anyone else, but they've been banning about the idea of Shantae animated series. And I sort of wanted to talk a little bit about the general scope of what the franchise is, and a little bit about the art and things like that. So that's what this particular video is about. I'm doing like a wide sweeping hand gesture as I do this to symbolize the fact that all of the topics have now been contained. They're no longer roaming free, causing havoc amongst the populace. Okay. I really, really like the art style of the prior game, and I believe the lead art director, I believe it was a lady, and I cannot remember what her name is, but I really like that art style, and you'll even see me sort of incorporate some aspects of that in this one. I'm not trying to use not like that sort of attitude or anything. But one of the things I sort of picked up from that particular art style is the idea of doing sort of a rim mid-tone shade. And once we get to the color, if I can remember, I'll point it out. but essentially you have like the base skin tone or whatever, the hair or whatever you're coloring, and it's, say her hair is purple. And then whenever you pick the darker color for the shading, for the shadows, you pick a darker purple that is a little bit more saturated, and maybe you move it over a little bit into the blues or into the reds, depending on what sort of a general tone to the color you want there to be. And in the art style of their prior game, what they would do is, on that meeting point between the base tone and the shadow tone, there would be a very, very thin amount of extra shading that was sort of a mid-tone between those two. But it was so fine you could barely even see that it was even there. I really liked the look of that. It was a good way of making sure that the style was simplistic, but also had a little bit of depth to it, which you typically can't get if you're going with just two-tone. But the fact that there was that little bitty bit of tritone to it meant that you don't have to overwork the image, but at the same time, it does carry a little bit more of that colorful authority to it, if that makes any sense. So I always like that, and I sort of incorporate that into this one. The style that they used in Seven Sirens, and they reuse a lot of assets from their prior game, from what I can tell. The art style seems to be a little bit more dramatically, it's like more jagged, and there's a lot more gestural sort of line work. And that seems to be, I'm not sure why they chose to go that route. I don't really care for it that much. I much prefer the look of their prior game. But I think they might be doing it to accompany the Trigger Studio opening. I'm not sure if the cart's before the horse on that one. It could have been in reverse, that they decided to pursue Trigger to try to go for this art style. But I think that the art style of it being more gestural and sort of more jagged with a little bit more sort of oomph to the models, because like her arms will, instead, like how I'm drawing the character now is it emphasizes tone, and it emphasizes the volume of the body and things like that, because this is another, like, it's thick. Like, I draw thick characters, I guess, is how the children would put it these days. But in this newer art style, it's more that the character is much slim. Even all the characters are much slimmer. The body shapes are extremely geometric. They don't really look realistic in any aspect whatsoever. So it sort of loses some of that natural sort of body weight and volume that the old style would carry. And even the old style was also sort of like this. It was not realistic either. But it did have a little bit of that element in there that made it a little bit more appealing to me. But anyway, so this is all like nitpicking. Point being, the game looks a little bit different. But mainly just from like dialogue sequences. Because most of the game looks pretty much the same as the prior game, except it's a little bit better looking, obviously. There's more art assets being thrown around. And it's mainly just the discussion panels that they use whenever the characters interact with one another. Those are the ones that carry most of the new art style on them. There is a general sort of issue that I started thinking about whenever I was playing the game. And I wanted to mention this in context of them going with this idea of having a new animation. The Shantae games, and I've played probably 3 of them by now, none of them really stick with me too much, because I actually like the gameplay in them, because with me, if you've been following me long enough, you know that I don't really value difficulty in any of the games, in games in general. I've made fun of this in the past, the idea that the more difficult a game is, the more merit you have as a person for beating it, that sort of thing. I find that to be completely ridiculous. I play games mainly to sort of shut myself off. So, games, whenever they are demanding all of my attention, all of my time, and trying to emphasize that this is a skill set you need to learn, and only the very best will be allowed to have personal satisfaction in the games. I don't care for that at all. Shantae games are fairly easy. They do require a little bit of paying attention. You can easily die if you're not paying too much attention. They're not brain dead or anything like that. To me, they strike the right balance for someone like me, where they are sort of easy, but also engaging enough that you still have to pay attention to what you're doing, but not so much that you can't, say, listen to a video most of the time playing while you're doing something, or listen to music, or, something like that. It's a pretty laid-back sort of a game series. I would recommend it for that reason. But there isn't much substance to the games in terms of things like narrative. Whenever you play games, you have to wonder, why are you playing the game? For some people, it's, obviously difficulty. Some people, they want to be able to beat a challenge that someone has created. And to them, that's what the games are for. That's what video games are for. If it provides no substantive difficulty, then they don't want to bother playing it at all, because to them, there's no merit. Some people will only play games for story. Some people will only play games for like the variety of gameplay, like it's like Bloodborne versus a Dark Souls or something would be a fairly good example of that, where it's more of a quality versus quantity sort of thing. Like, how many weapons do you want versus do you want the weapons to be extremely special, or just things like that. There's all sorts of reasons why people play video games. With Shantae, there's really not much going on, and from what I can tell, the games themselves were not intensely popular or anything until they started going this route of the characters being sort of this cute, sexy thing. You can tell they've been playing that up ever since the, I guess, mid-2000s? Or that may have started in the 2010s, I don't remember. But once they started doing that, then the popularity of the games took off a little bit more, because the main value of the games, of course, is just that the characters they have that sort of cute, sexy appeal. Like Shantae herself, she's one of these characters like Dante or Master Chief or, Doomslayer or something, in the sense of, or Kiryu, where they know nothing about sex. Like, she is completely oblivious. Even though she's like a highly sexualized character in many ways, the game never really presents that in a very obvious way. She doesn't really exist for sex appeal, in a sense. She obviously is meant to be a sexy character, and the game's story, if it could be called that, definitely makes fun of that a lot. The games break the fourth wall quite often. And there's lots of scenes where they're obviously like, this is fan service. Do you get it? This is fan service. So it sort of carries that tone. But Shantae herself, like, sex never really even comes up in the universe. Ever so often there'll be, like, Sky, one of the blonde archer character that Shantae is friends with, is sort of man crazy. It's sort of hard to tell. But that seems to be her general thing. She's looking for a man. And she kind of goes goo-goo. Like, once in all the games, she always goes gaga for, or goo-goo, if you so wish, for some guy in one of the stories. But only for like one scene, and then it's over. But other than that, yeah, it never really comes up. The characters are simply good-looking or fun to watch, and then that's the end of it. That's all there is. So, that's probably the main value of the games. They're fairly simple, so you're not going to be getting too much in terms of, wow, that was quite the difficulty that I overcame. My penis is extra big today. Well, it might be, but not for the reasons of difficulty in conquering challenges. I would say that the games do offer enough that you won't have to worry too much about... You won't be bored or anything, but the main value of the games, of course, is just mainly the art style and just the delivery of the characters and the general setting and so forth and so on. In terms of story, there's really nothing going on. I think even since the first games, the whole thing has been Shantae trying to figure out more about her past. If there is a core story to the games at all. which there practically isn't. And over the 3 games that I've played, I think she briefly saw like an illusion or a ghostly manifestation of her dad. And she sort of has gotten some hints of her mother leaving her a message, and that's been pretty much it. Almost nothing ever happens in terms of a core story in the Shantae games. Usually just someone gets kidnapped, or someone's gonna blow something up, or, what, it's some sort of flimsy reason. And then she goes through a series of levels, and there's sort of a flimsy core premise, and then it's over. Like, there's just not much to any of it. And even the characters, I would say, are fairly two-dimensional. Most of them are sort of archetypes that don't really do much beyond that. Her uncle is like I think he's supposed to be like a crazy scientist, but that never really comes up in the character interactions. It's usually more just her uncle. Like, he's so normal. Like, he looks like he's supposed to be the crazy guy, but he never really does anything. And the same for the other characters. They don't really do much of anything. Shantae is the one that usually is on screen, of course. And her personality is more that she's sort of not oblivious or stupid exactly, but she's not an airhead, but at the same time, she doesn't really track the things around her terribly well. But then again, neither do any of the other characters in the world. It's such a strange setting. Everyone seems to be a little bit dumb, but dumb enough that it makes sense as a coherent setting. It's very strange. Like, using her uncle as an example, you will meet him out in the field sometimes, and he will just say things like, pull that lever, or here's this MacGuffin that you're going to need for the next part of the level, or, things like that. And he doesn't really do much besides that. But whenever you look at him, and whenever you see him in, like, the opening cutscenes or something, you get the impression that he's supposed to have more character beyond that. But again, it just never really comes up. They don't really use the characters at all. So whenever they say we're exploring the idea of a Shantae cartoon, I don't know if that's going to work. Because it's obvious that WayForward doesn't really care about the story in these games. It's not really important. The important thing is just that the characters are all cute, the setting is cute, the gameplay is fairly engaging, not anything too groundbreaking or amazing or anything, but it's just a fairly solid little experience, a good time waster for a few days, and then that's it. So translating the setting into a cartoon, especially when the main appeal is supposed to be that the characters are all living sex objects without realizing that they're sex objects, and the setting never treating it that way. I don't know if that's going to carry. I have no idea what a cartoon about Shantae would even be about. Will they have to drastically alter her art style to make her more universally acceptable for general audiences? Because you have to admit, even though that she isn't portrayed as being this, living sex object or anything in universe, just her design is provocative enough. Not excessively provocative, I guess. I'm more so making it that way because I'm me. But you would really get the impression that if they were translating that for a general audience, then if they went through Netflix or something, for example, if they were doing like a short mini-series, then they would probably... Either they would have to go for a higher rating, like a teen or above, of course, or they would have to really radically alter everything about the tone and whatnot, because it's such a weird setting. Shantae herself, the character, she's designed. The game is almost like designed for an M-rated game that never existed. The game itself is made for teens, but at the same time, the writing and the characterization and everything is almost made for, like, everyone audiences. So there's a really weird juxtaposition of things going on in the Shantae universe, where it's sort of a general audience's game that has hints at M-rated tones while at the same time being made for teen audiences. It's bizarre. It's not like excessively bizarre or anything worrisome, but it's just kind of weird. So if you're making a cartoon, I have no idea what it's going to be about. A lot of great cartoons have been coming out lately. Like Owl House is out, Mau Mau is going on right now. I'm not going to go through and name everything. But all those are sort of defined by the fact that they have this accessible audience that at the same time it's being driven by the cleverness and just the cleverness of its writing more so, especially Mau Mau. If you watch that, it's very much so. If you're an adult, you're gonna maybe laugh more than your kids might, because your kids are not really going to get what you're laughing at. But at the same time, what's going on screen is going to be something that even a 6-year-old kid or whatever is going to laugh at. It's a good, solid series. I think it actually is doing sort of. It's either doing badly in ratings or they hit like a sort of a lull in their production. I'm not sure what's going on there. I hope it's doing well though. It was tracking fairly well online, but I don't know what it's doing now. Owl House is a Disney show, so I don't think it's going to have too many problems. Usually with Disney shows, if something doesn't erupt as a huge banger, then they will pull funding for the next seasons and try to encourage them to stop after, 3 or 4, but that's pretty much it. But with Shantae, the writing is never really that clever. Again, there's a lot of fourth wall breaking in Shantae, and more so it is just very blunt, like, do you get it? The character is hot, or do you get it? We're talking about game systems right now. Do you get it? The characters are being packaged like dolls. Do you get it? The squid things that you've been collecting this entire time are actually the children of this other living creature, and you've been massacring them the whole time. And it's not really treated that seriously. And that's it. Like, that's the general jokes. And I don't know if that's going to land. It really depends heavily on who the writers of such a series would even be. Because, again, the games don't really seem to care about their writing at all. Like, it's just enough to where it's sort of like, haha, it's kind of cute. But then that's it. So whether that's going to land or not, I have no idea. It's going to depend very heavily. Like, the general idea of a Shantae cartoon is fine, but there is so little going on in the games as they are, because, again, I don't get the impression that they actually care about the setting or the characters as characters beyond being able to, utilize them to make games, because that's what they care about. I don't know if it's going to translate. But I wish them well either way. By the way, now that I'm starting shading here, you can sort of notice a couple of things that I'm going to be doing. Again, the thing that I talked about before with adding that sort of mid-tone, which I'll get to after I get through with this part. But the other thing that I've been doing with this one is, since this is a bit more of a cartoony style, rather than just doing... Like, if you ever had this problem, if you're doing two-tone and you wonder, well, I'm shading a round object or something, or like an arm or, something, and you think, I like the general tone that I'm using for this, but it works better on, like, the more jagged areas, like the neck, like going into the clavicle or things like that. Things where there's more hard stops in the geometry. And you wonder, well, whenever I, like, go over, like, the chest or go over, like, the stomach or something, how do I handle that? Because the fact that the shading is so dark against this much lighter in tone and lower in saturation color is making it look harder than it needs to be. And you notice with my shading, what I'm doing is sort of adding a little bitty line on the outskirts of where I feel like the geometry is starting to fold over and become more spherical. So rather than, say, using a blending tool and actually making it painterly, what I'll do is just add that little bitty line, and it sort of gives the insinuation that there is a break in the tonality, I guess, of the color. So that instead of it fading into that next color, or existing as a hard edge, it sort of gives that insinuation that there's a mid-tone that doesn't actually exist. And I think that's another thing that I actually picked up from the older Shantae art styles. Or at least it's an idea that I sort of started creating around the same time. I think that's where I got that from. It's been a while since I thought about it. But that's what I'm doing. As far as the game itself, the Sirens game, the criticisms are the same that I was talking about just now. Story, basically non-existent. There's a very flimsy premise. Again, the people that are making the games don't seem to care about the writing at all. It just exists to make the video games, one of those things. There's, like, you're not really going to encounter many, like, heartwarming moments or tragedies or, you know, amazing developments in the story. Like, things happen, but it's not really that important. Even some of the things that might be important are completely undercut by the attempt at having some easy humor. It's not a game that you go... It's not a game series that you go to for any meaningful storytelling. Just don't worry about that. With Shantae, I'm trying to think of how to best explain this. With Shantae, all the games have been a little bit different from one another in terms of what you do in the games. Sort of the core thing is that Shantae whips her hair, and that's her main attack. She can dance in all the games. Like, the whole aesthetic is like she's a belly dancer. Even though I guess she's not really a belly dancer, it's just that her power set stems from her ability to transform as a consequence of dancing. I don't know if it's ever come up that she's ever been trained to belly dance. I don't know. It's just sort of a thing that it doesn't really come up. But anyways, in Sirens, basically the idea is that she does a lot of the transformations automatically now. So if you come to water, for example, and God, it took forever to get to the point where I could actually go in water. If you go into water and you just dive into it, then you'll automatically transform into the thing that you need to swim through the water. If you get to sand, you'll automatically transform into the thing that you need to get through sand. Eventually, you get, of course, since it's sort of a Vania sort of game, eventually you get the ability to double jump or triple jump. You'll automatically, of course, transform into that. It's really just more a matter of they switch out the model whenever you start to do things like that. So it's not Shantae swimming, it's like a frog or, something like that. So that's all automatic. I wouldn't exactly call them game systems. It's just, again, a Vania thing where you are now allowed to do something. Other than that, she has magical items, I guess, that you can buy. Like, orbiting scimitars that go around your body, or a super ball that bounces around the room, or homing missiles. I'll be honest with you, I used almost none of them, because using the magic powers are usually... most of them, really the only one that I really use reliably are the homing missiles. And that was because I don't really care too much for this sort of style of game, usually. Shantae is easy enough that who cares? But with something like, say, Hollow Knight is a good example of this. Hollow Knight starts getting pretty difficult as you keep going on. Because, in a way, 2D platformers sort of share some things in common with shmups in a way. Like the games where it's a 2D thing and you fly and you shoot things. And then enemies will drop items that allow you to upgrade your ship, those old things. Just in the sense that it's about noting projectile paths and patterns, and then adjusting for that, and then moving out of their way, and so forth and so on. With Shantae, it sort of does this thing, which makes me think of the old Zelda CDI games, because I associate them so strongly with this problem, of when you attack in front of you, But enemies are usually either so small that you have to crouch to hit them, or you have to jump and then hit them out of midair. And doing the timing to actually hit the enemies out of midair is very awkward because that's what the video game is. Like, that's what these games are all about. It's just the mild awkwardness of being... Here I'm doing that mid-tone thing, by the way. You can see me doing, like, the rim on the... Like, I'm just barely adding it. This is what I picked. I definitely picked this up from the earlier Shantae game. So, that's what I was talking about, sorry. Oh, crap, I distracted myself. Yeah, I did not use many of the actual powers. The timing thing. So yeah, whenever you come across enemies, they will either be too low for you to actually hit them reliably, or they will be too high up in the air for you to hit them reliably. So you have to have this thing where you jump up and down over and over and over again, hitting the attack button and just barely missing enemies over and over, running the risk consistently of almost getting hit. And that's what the video game is. Like, that's the whole thing. Not my favorite thing because it's just so awkward. Don't really care too much for it. It's not a big problem or anything. Just, doesn't really attract me too much. So the homing missile allowed me to ignore that because it just goes to the enemy and kills them. And once I got, you get these. If you kill a number of enemies, sometimes they will drop a card, and after you get X number of cards, it depends on the enemy. Then you will get sort of a perk, I guess is the best way to describe it, that will modify something. Usually they modify your magical abilities. Sometimes they'll do things like raise your basic attack damage or whatever. Once I got one that allowed me to natively regenerate my magic, it made the game so much more enjoyable. I could actually do things without having to constantly worry about whether I was going to run out of a resource or not. It was still an issue, of course, but I just had to not worry about it quite as much. But homing missile was the only one I really used. There was a point at the very very end of the game where I actually had to use the sort of orbiting scimitar move, and that was just because, again, that problem in these games of I could not hit the target that it wanted me to hit because it is so intensely awkward trying to align yourself to them. Because, again, that's what the game is supposed to be about. So just having that on at least allowed me to damage something in the general area, although it ended up taking forever. Other than that, like the Super Ball, it sort of just pops off and then just goes away. Usually doesn't hit anything. Kind of a waste. There's a fire ability, but it doesn't really do that much damage. There's several that I just don't care about because I tried them a few times and I instantly realized that they do either deal almost no damage or they almost never hit the enemy that I want them to hit, or it would simply be easier to just hit the enemy with my basic attacks or to just avoid the enemy entirely. Like, most of the magic abilities are just, I wouldn't say completely useless, but they're just not particularly great. So that whole element of the game, I didn't really use it that much, unfortunately. I think that's something that they definitely could work on because most of the games have been almost the same as one another. I would not say that the games are unprofessional or anything, but you can definitely tell that they have a limited staff. I mean, it's WayForward, of course. It's not really major criticism or anything. They do a good job with the staff that they have and the time that they're being allotted and everything. But the games are very samey in many ways, using the same magical abilities and at least my experience with them so far. And in all the games, I can't really think of any. Maybe it's some pro thing where, oh no, if you use this ability in this way, it's the most broken thing in the game, didn't you know? I don't know. Just in my personal experience, I've never really had much use for them. There's also another thing where you can dance and then choose one of 4 different abilities, but those are mainly just for opening. In video games, there's what are called gates, or gating systems. And that's like, say, if you're playing Metroid and you come across a door that is blue, I need to get the ice beam before I'm allowed to open this. Like, that sort of thing. That's a gate. Like, that's part of a gating system. And all those moves really do is just act as a gating system. You have 4 of them, and each one of them basically allows you to utilize some area of the environment that you otherwise would not be able to use. Is the best way to describe that in vague terms. So, a couple of them sort of act as room clears. So there's at least 2 of them that are sort of useful in that respect. One works on anything, and one does a little bit more damage, but it only works on things that are physically not flying in the air, is the best way to put it. So you can sort of use that sometimes, but usually it's not really that big a deal. Plus, it takes so long to cast them that you're sort of discouraged from doing it in the first place, because it just takes too long. You'll be there all day otherwise, just waiting on the move to complete. So, in terms of gameplay, it's like fine. It's a serviceable game. Nothing about it is particularly mind-blowing, which is kind of Shantae in a nutshell. The games are never astonishing. They never do anything that's truly amazing or anything that will blow your mind, but they're serviceable, fun little games that offer as a fairly good distraction. I'm not sure what exactly I would have them do in the future to actually alter that. I do think that they really need to work on their writing. You can often tell... It's sort of a problem I have with some creators in general, is... Sometimes there are different kinds of creators. Some people care about story more than anything else, and that can be detrimental because they'll forget about gameplay if they're making a game or whatever it is. Or you'll have people that care about like systems more than anything else, and then they'll lose scope of the more general gameplay, like the way that you engage with the game. Or you'll have people that obsess over sort of like a Magic the Gathering style system, or a Dungeons and Dragons sort of system, where they focus a lot on the numbers and the back end. And as a result, they bloat the game so much that it becomes almost impossible for most users to interact with the game at all. And that becomes their flaw. With the Shantae games, it's one of these cases of, you can tell that whoever is creating the game doesn't care that much about the story. They don't care that much about the characters. Even the gameplay, they don't really seem to care that much about. They're just trying to make something that is... Like, I don't know what their internal goals are or anything like that, but they seem to just be making a game for the sake of being able to make something somewhat quickly and easily on enough of a budget to where they're not going to drive anyone in their offices crazy or anything like that. So that everyone on staff feels satisfied, and everyone that's playing the games is feeling satisfied. They're not shooting for the moon, they're not crunching anyone, as far as I know anyways. They're just making generally solid games that probably won't ever go anywhere overly dramatic. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But again, if they're looking to expand into cartoons, you might want to find someone that is really in love with the characters enough to expand them in a way that will be satisfying beyond the scope of what you're doing right now. So, I guess that's my general review of Shantae. It's just a fairly solid... It's probably one of the reasons why, like, for example, people were pushing for her in Smash or something like that. And I can't possibly imagine her really having that much traction, because none of the games have really been, like, world breakers or anything. They come out, they get a little bit of track and discussion. Most of the sort of viral push that she gets is a consequence of the fan art. And most of the fan art is, obviously, like in my case, exemplifying how good-looking or sexy the characters happen to be. And that's it. Like, that's as far as I can really see the marketing taking her. Whenever you're making things like this, the natural scope of the games has to have legs in some aspect. You're not going to see anyone talking about Shantae clones, for example. Like, you know that there's Soul clones, or there are people that are imitating WoW, or people that are imitating Halo, or, you know, whatever happens to be these days. You're You're not really going to see that about Shantae, because Shantae I wouldn't describe it as being formulaic or anything. They have their own little identity. But it's nothing that's too intensely amazing. It would be interesting to see if they completely shake up their internal formula in some way in the future, but I really doubt that they're going to. As far as my own ideas for that, I really don't know. I haven't given that much thought about Shantae specifically. It seems like the core aspects to her have always been, though, and here we have the final image, have been the fact that she's a dancer, the fact that she has her personality, and she can transform. That seems to be the main things. Just dancing, transformation, and carrying the little aspect of characterization that she's had into the games up until this point somewhere new. She has the whole aspect with her parentage and having that mystery. It goes a little bit more into the nature of being a half genie a little bit in this game, but it kind of doesn't really go anywhere exactly. It'd be nice to see someone develop that some. I could sit down and come up with some ideas myself, but I'm really not that into the games in the first place. I mainly just wanted to draw Shantae's big fat ass. I also did this on stream while we were watching DS9, so most of you have already probably seen me do this. Fun fact, it actually took me 3.5 hours, I think, to actually draw this, which is very fast for me. Usually, I spend a lot of time sort of cavorting with aspects to the design, and the final result of this was fine. There are little aspects to it that sort of bother me, but that's true of any drawing that I do. I do like some of the choices I made in regards to coloring and things like that. The body structure is probably the thing that I would have the most contention with. There's nothing dramatically wrong with it or anything, though. It's just sort of like very, very, very minor things that only I would see. Alright, anyways. I wanted to release another thing as quickly as possible to sort of make up for betraying you with Necrons. I'll do more in the future. And you guys let me know if you want a weird Corona video that I have no idea what we would even talk about, but maybe I will. I don't know. Alright, see you guys next time.